Wonderful. And as I said, thank you again for joining us today. This is the Startup Funding Student Grant Funding on VentureWell info session, specifically focused on the ETeam grant. So we're going to talk about the grant, and you'll get to learn a little bit more about sort of the ins and outs of the grant, as well as the process in terms of going through the application and what that looks like. So I'm Gloria Negrete, and I'm the Executive Director of the Basement, also the Executive Director of Strategy with the Office of Innovation and Commercialization. That's my role. I will provide my contact information at the end of this, so if any of you want to follow up, please feel free to do so, and I'll share that contact info later. I'm going to skip over some things. I did invite someone to join us that's been part of the application process and is an awardee team for several of the different grant phase cycles. And so hopefully he'll be joining us a little later today, so you get to hear from an actual awardee and their perspective. But for now, I'd like to start by doing a land acknowledgement. And this is really important and something that we're just beginning to do here as part of the Office of Innovation and Commercialization. And I do want to just share this with you all. This is the first time we're doing it as part of the Basement. And so it is very new to us, but we did want to share this land acknowledgement slide with you all. And as part of the Office of Innovation and Commercialization, we deeply think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and it's important for us to acknowledge the land that we're on. So UC San Diego holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where we're located. The university was built on this unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation, and today that community continues to maintain their political sovereignty as well as their cultural traditions, and is a vital part of our community here in San Diego. So we're honored to share this space, and we thank them for their stewardship, and certainly we want to acknowledge that. If you want to learn more about the land that you're on, I did provide a link for you on so that you can take a look. It's native-land.ca, so take a look at that if you'd like to learn more. So here's what we're going to cover, and I mentioned a few of these items earlier. Hopefully we'll get to all of this. I'd like to set aside some time for Q&A, but I won't go through every single item. As I said, we'll record this. We'll also be able to provide the slides to you all later if you want to take a look at some things that are listed here specifically. Okay, so let's start with the funding that is available through the grant. And this is really something that I think is important to be aware of. The grant is offered in several phases. So it's a two tranche phase opportunity. For those of you that are interested in the ETeam grant, there's the first phase where you're able to apply for up to $5,000 worth of a grant, and a secondary phase for $20,000. These are not automatic, so if you get the phase 1 funding, you don't necessarily get acceptance or award for the second phase. You are, I think, in a better position if you've received phase 1 funding to then apply to phase 2, and we would encourage you to do that. But it certainly isn't an automatic thing. So be aware each of these tranches of funds do require an application process. And what I'm going to do is I'll skip over, there's some more opportunities for funding through VentureWell. I'll skip over those, and if there's time at the end, I can cover some of that information. And also, I want to make sure that, all of you are able to chime in with questions. You're welcome to see things into the chat. We can get to those at the end during the Q&A section. If you want to unmute yourself and you want to ask a question directly during the presentation, I invite you to do that, so please feel free to do that as well. So let's start with the ETeam grant program and what this looks like. And so essentially this is an opportunity for teams that are really based in the sciences and engineering to apply for non-dilutive funding available through the VentureWell organization. And it's really an opportunity to take, you know, your idea from lab to market. That's really the purpose of this kind of grant. It does come with networking and mentorship opportunities, as well as training. And so, you know, beyond getting the funding, really VentureWell is trying to help support your process from taking your innovation out of the lab, so to speak, and into the market for commercialization. So that's really the goal with the grant. And then it does come with training, as I mentioned, and so there are workshops that you would participate in, and this is really what phase 1 looks like. Phase 2 is different. You would run through, you know, a series of different topic areas. The goal with phase 1, so you know, really the idea behind this phase of the grant is to allow the team to learn the process for, you know, commercialization. What does that look like? So that's really one of the focus areas, as well as really checking your assumptions behind your innovation and taking more time to, you know, suss that out. And so those are some of the key kind of focuses. You would cover some of these topic areas in the workshop phase of the grant if you're awarded. And so it runs through, you know, some of these different areas that are really significant during that early phase process. Because it's virtual, things have been done a little differently, obviously, but this is the breakdown of what the structure looks like currently. VentureWell's done a nice job to kind of keep things really as comprehensive as possible, even in the virtual dynamic. Previously, if you were awarded the grant, you would use some of that funding to travel out to their location to, you know, to visit and be part of those workshop opportunities in person. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, things are still happening virtually, and but I would say they've done a great job of really engaging participants through the process and still keeping it as comprehensive as possible. So let's talk about the criteria for applying. This is really important because, and I would say, you know, one of the most significant, you know, part of the process for you as a potential applicant is to really look closely at the application criteria and make sure that you're a match. I can't stress this enough. And the reason, you know, we say that is because we do have teams that, you know, may apply and find that they go through the full process and are not a fit. And it can be quite an intensive process. So we want to make sure up front that we're matching the criteria. But there's some, you know, things to think about before you even get there. Are you eligible? And so some things to consider are, you know, whether or not the team is comprised of current students that are enrolled in a U.S.-based institution. Of course, you know, UC San Diego would qualify for that. And if your university is part of the VentureWell organization that is an active member, I can tell you that UC San Diego we have an active membership, and so you would be able to certainly apply for these grants. It would be open to you. Team does need to be comprised of at least 2 members, and so making sure that these are current students is also one of the criteria that VentureWell would look at. You will also need to demonstrate support from your institution, and I'll talk more about that later, and what that would look like and what the process would be for you to ensure that you get that institutional support to back your proposal for the grant. And then lastly, and this is what I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that the product fits the ETeam grant program and the criteria, and really what the intended purposes of the grant and what that looks like and what VentureWell would consider a fit. And I can pause that there for a moment if there are any questions for this part of it. Okay, we'll move on. So when I said program fit, product fit, this is really important. And again, it really should be the first step for you as a potential applicant to look very closely at the the product, the innovation that you're looking to develop. Does it fit within the criteria of what VentureWell is looking for? And so, in other words, is the innovation highly novel? This is critical. Does it have the potential to scale? And then this is also very important. Is there a potential for creation of social, economic, or environmental impact with your innovation? So those are key. And then lastly, is there a feasible pathway for your innovation to be commercialized? And this is one of the things that, sometimes applicants might have something that looks like a great project, but it doesn't necessarily have commercial potential. And so those are some high level, areas that you want to consider as part of your review of the grant opportunity and whether or not it's going to be a fit for your innovation.
I have a quick question. I was
Sure,
wondering,
go ahead, Paul.
yeah, so my idea is to start a production company to do documentaries and sell them to Netflix and chill. Now, would that be considered a physical product?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and we do have, some examples of what, might constitute a physical product and some awardable and non-awardable, so to speak, innovations based on what VentureWell considers awardable for this grant. The thing to think about, though, is the impact piece is significant. So I would say to you, Paul, if you think, after this session that it still might merit the application, what I would urge you to do is apply to maybe not this cycle, but the next one. VentureWell does about 3 to 4 cycles or open application periods a year. So as soon as one of the application deadlines closes, they tend to put, it may take a week or two before they post the deadline for the new application cycle. But one thing to be aware of is they have a qualification application, and that's less time intensive. It's just a way to submit your idea and get the feedback from VentureWell. At that point, if they think it's a fit, in other words, if they think your innovation is a program product fit, they will invite you to apply. And so that's what I would suggest for you, and that way it's a little less time intensive on your end to do this.
You think you could drop that link in the chat for the pre-application?
Yeah, so if you go into VentureWell and the website, you can easily find the information. The qualification round, though, just to be clear, is not open yet. At this point, you would have missed the qualification round for the February cycle, and that tends to happen about a month or so ahead of each deadline. So just to be clear, that qualification round is not currently open. I would say maybe go to the VentureWell site, and that would be the place to track when it's open again. I'm just trying to pull that up for you quickly so that you know where to look in the future.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it.
Did that make sense?
It makes total sense,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, great. So let me go ahead and put this in here for you all so that you can take a look at that later. Okay, so I had mentioned to you, there are some things to think about in terms of what would qualify as a typical ETeam innovation, and this is coming from VentureWell specifically. So what are some of these product inventions that do fit the grant criteria? I'm not going to read all of these, but so it is important to think about what I mentioned earlier. This is specifically designed for science and engineering teams. That said, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to be a group of engineers or science majors or anything like that. And I would certainly encourage you to think about the criteria, think about your innovation, and if you still feel it could be a fit, then by all means, I would still encourage you to apply. Some of the things that would be considered in product, fit for this grant are, things in the area of biomedical devices, global health technologies. Those would be a fit. Technologies that are helping to address, major concerns, societal concerns like addressing poverty or basic human needs. Those are, significant matches that, if you note that final bullet point, there are other compelling technologies that could meet the criteria, especially if they have a strong, social or environmental or even economic impact, that VentureWell would consider those as well. So I don't want to discourage anyone from applying that, doesn't see themselves in this specific list of typical ETeam inventions. So Paul, hopefully this is helpful as well in identifying what could be a fit. Okay, and if there are no questions, I'm going to go on from there. Okay, so, and this could also be helpful to you, Paul, and some of the others that are thinking about applying, but maybe are not sure that their innovation is a direct match. And so some of the things that, they might not necessarily consider awardable projects or projects that are web-based or mobile applications that tends to come up quite a bit, I will say. And so, if those product, submissions don't come with or carry a significant innovative or, societal impact, they might not be considered. And so that's important to note as well, because we do see a number of those quite a bit. And so keeping that in mind. And then, some of these other ones are really more due to the nature of the innovation. So for example, therapeutics and drugs aren't necessarily considered, and that's mainly to do with the long runway that's at stake in development. And so for that reason, it's not ones that are typically considered. The other thing to think about, here are projects that are not necessarily driven by students or teams where the students don't have a high opportunity in terms of decision making or aren't necessarily influencing, what develops in the way of intellectual property. And so that's something to note here as well. If you've got something that you've been working with a faculty member on, if it's not necessarily student driven, that could be, one of the reasons why it might not get the award or get acceptance to the grant. And then one of the other ones on here that I would suggest that you think about is whether or not the project is sort of grounded in this idea that there is an intent to commercialize. And so this commercialization pathway piece is really important to note as well. And I do see that we have our guest joining us, who is going to talk a little bit about their experience with the grant. So I'm going to move back up to introduce them, and then we'll come back to all of this. And that way you have an opportunity to hear from them on their experience as a grant awardee for both phase 1 and phase 2 of the VentureWell grant. So let me get to that and admit them in. I'm just giving them a moment to connect here. Hi, Casey.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. Welcome. We've got a good group joining today, and so I'm just going to go ahead and introduce you and put myself on mute so that you can share your experience as a VentureWell awardee team for phase 1 and phase 2 of the ETeam grant. I think folks that have joined us today would love to hear kind of, what your experience was like. Any tips, obviously, that you can share are going to be tremendous as well. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Casey Fitzpatrick, who is one of the co-founders and the current COO of the Remora team. also a former, and I would say alum of the Basement Incubator at the UC San Diego campus. So I'll turn it over to you, Casey, to share your experience.
Thank you, Gloria. Yeah, so hi, everyone. I'm Casey Fitzpatrick. And so obviously, big pro for going into VentureWell, especially coming from the basement, is with the first in stage 1, the 5K. I'm not sure what Gloria's already discussed with it, but they do fund you $5,000 for stage 1. And then in the event you do get into stage 2, it's an additional 20K of funding. And now, so for each event, they hold them in Boston, which you do have to put some of the funds from these grants into the travel. However, for us on stage 2, because of COVID, they did change things into more of a virtual format, which was actually pretty useful on our end because although it's really fun to travel, we are working at this part-time with our full-time jobs. So we're able to be a little bit more flexible on using our full-time job hours while teleworking to do this type of stuff during the day. And more or less, coming from an engineering perspective, it was really useful to go through this program because I didn't have too much apart from other incubators like the Basement or other talks that we've been to really get some more of that formal business development insight. And 2 big things that they focus on in VentureWell is business model canvases and the OKR, or objectives and key results concepts. They do a really good job at describing both of those, which help both in developing your approach and business model for the company, and also how you're going to actually conduct and perform and achieve your goals. They also really stress the importance of customer research and discovery. When you get into stage 2, they actually require the teams, because while the events themselves last about a week, for stage 2, it continues for about 3 months of reoccurring events. And within those 3 months, you have to be conducting 30 customer interviews. So they really see it really highly to have done so, which I would suggest for you guys to do regardless, because they really do value the importance, which in reality is just really important, of understanding your customer and making sure that what you're trying to create matches the needs of that customer. And with that, they do have strong ties with the NSF I-Corps program. So for anyone who's not familiar with the I-Corps program, basically the intent of it within National Science Foundation is to provide startups funding to basically conduct more customer research. And so with the background of doing those 30 customer interviews within the VentureWell program, along with any that you guys might have already done, it really does a good job at prepping you for the ultimate application if you do aim to go into the I-Corps program in nationals. And along with that, VentureWell does a really good job at selecting a diverse range of other teams to be going in there. There's definitely a pretty heavy theme on pharmaceuticals and medical, but the amount of people and the locations of everyone is super diverse, and everyone was super helpful. At times, I felt like I was almost learning just as much from the other members who were going through it as I did from the program itself. The connections that you do get with the program are fantastic in that end. A lot of people in their stage of development, it differs a lot. So you'll find people who are below you and you'll find people who are above you, to give a nice little range of asking questions towards you, which you might be able to help other people with, and asking questions to other people to help you with. And for the application, kind of as I was saying earlier, when they do focus a lot on the business model canvases and OKR systems, when you're considering applying, I would suggest you guys take a little bit of research on your own to check out business model canvases and make sure that in your application, in your slide deck, you really are able to explain how you guys meet each of the concepts. because having a little bit of advantage right there is going to help you get into VentureWell, I think. And obviously expressing an understanding of your customer base is going to help because that's such a big thing that they push. And they also do like to see a little bit of prototyping, although it's not too necessary. I would also stress putting some focus in your application on describing not just your idea, but what you've done so far to come to proving your idea might actually technically work. So yeah, that's a couple of my learnings and experiences there. Overall, it was a really good time. Yeah.
Thank you, Casey. And I know we don't want to take up too much of your time, but if you have a moment or two, and if there are any questions, I do invite the group to maybe ask questions away while we have Casey.
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah. Go ahead. The other person.
Okay. My team is Helpstore. We're actually we just got accepted into the Basement Incubator program, like you said as well. And I guess my question is, how early of a development stage do you think we should be on before applying? Like, is there criteria for that? I know you talked about prototyping. So we have some prototypes for our program. So let me give some background. So my team, it's called Helpstore. And we're basically trying to design and develop an application that targets local businesses, small and local businesses, and give them support and give them a platform to like connect to other people. And so like people can donate to them and volunteer for them. But right now we're really trying to focus on the user design process and trying to conduct as many interviews and research as we can before continuing on to developing. So I guess our question is, like, do you think this would be fit for your guys's application? And yeah.
So I would like to say that I'm not a part of VentureWell myself, but yeah, I think it's a good position for you guys to go into, having a little bit of prototyping. But the thing that is really going to convince them is that you guys have understood your business model. Being able to pitch that forward and say that confidently, that hey, this is what we're going to be doing, this is how we're going to be doing, this is why we know it's going to work. Along with that, look at what we've already done. The look at what we've already done with that prototyping is definitely complimentary, but from their perspective, and seeing some of the other teams that had also gone through the program with us, some of them who are a little bit less developed, I definitely would say like absolutely zero prototyping is not as ideal. But if you're able to confidently say what you want to be doing, then, or like how you're going to be doing it, then that's going to really help, because some of the funding that they do give you can go back and be allocated into making more prototyping. So not having like a fully completely fleshed out prototype is fine, but yeah.
Okay, got it.
That's a cool idea too. I like it.
Thank you.
Oh, so my quick question. My quick question was, what did you got the first 5K, and then what did you spend the second 20K on? Like what can you spend that money on?
So the second 20K is definitely, the first 5K, they're a little bit more lenient on. You can kind of spend it to not everything that you want, but it's a little bit more open. For the 20K, they do allow up to 4K of it to be used on stipend, but the majority of it is generally intended to be used on R&D and development. You can go a little bit more outside of that if you request, potentially. And also along with that, Gloria was able to help us throughout the process, and we're still spending our 20K actually right now. And she's been doing a good job at checking in with us to make sure that we're on our schedule to drop all those funds too.
I have another question. So how long ago did you guys like apply for this program? And I guess when were you part of the Basement Incubator? And also, like, what is your project or your startup about?
So just to give more context on what we're doing. So yeah, what we're doing is we're making unmanned surface vehicles to collect marine debris specifically in coastal areas like ports, harbors, and lakes, in an effort to address the oceanic trash pollution problem. And we applied to VentureWell, I want to say about October, November-ish, 2019, maybe a little earlier than that, or farther away. And VentureWell Stage 1 began at the beginning of 2020, just before COVID had hit, which allowed us to actually go over to Boston and take part in the face-to-face aspect. And then Stage 2 began this past August, I believe. So it's been pretty recent. And yeah, once you get into phase 1, the transition into phase 2, I wouldn't say it's too difficult, but there might be more strict requirements on that kind of prototyping that they might want you to have. And just throughout the entire time, once you do get in, I would suggest you guys also keep in contact with everyone from VentureWell. We regularly check up with some of the people there, and it's really just not only made it easy for us to have confidence, for VentureWell to have confidence in us, but it's also made it easier for them to feel comfortable and us to feel comfortable to just go to each other whenever we need help. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's really helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Casey. Is there maybe one other question, it sounds like?
I can do one more question.
Yeah, I have a question. I guess it's for both of you. Now, if you can get, let's say for the physical project part, and you get the grant, can you get it also for like, let's say I come up with a physical product that can, a prototype that, it's a real world tangible asset versus my documentary production company ideas. Can you get two? Can you get like separate awards?
So are you saying, can you apply under 2 different teams?
Yes. So like if I wanted to start a team on a physical project versus, I would probably do a solo documentary project.
I want to say that would be 2 separate applications. I don't know if they would really accept 2 different projects at once. That's something that, at least for my amount of knowledge that I do have, would probably be best to ask VentureWell themselves. I'm not sure, Gloria, if you have any points to that.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it could be a challenge. Though I would say, Paul, if submitting 2 different applications, I think one of the things VentureWell is going to look for is that you're committed to the work and that you can commit the time. And so I think it would be a challenge to spread yourself in 2 different projects. So that would be one. But you are welcome to check in with VentureWell. David D'Angelo is the person that we typically work with, and during the open cycles, there's sometimes available office hours, or you might even be able to just reach out by email. So I encourage you to do that for those kinds of more specialized questions. And I want to be respectful of Stacey's time. So I know, we kind of took a little bit more than the 5 minutes that I committed you to. So I appreciate you joining us and answering the questions and also sharing your experience, Casey. So feel free to hop off. You don't have to stick around for the entire session with us.
Yeah, last thing I would say is, and thank you for inviting me over to talk to you guys, and good luck to everyone in applying to VentureWell. It's definitely worth it, I think. But yeah, Dave is pretty responsive. So if you do have questions, you can look him up. I think his email's on the website, and you can just shoot him your questions. But thank you, guys. Good luck.
Thanks, Casey. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, I'm going to move us back to where we were in the presentation. And I know, we were talking about what are some things that are typically non-awardable projects. But I do want to say that, again, I don't want to discourage anyone. So if you think you have something that merits or still could fit, especially if, the innovation has a very significant or high, potential for creating an impact that's either environmental, societal in nature, economic, as well as another area they look at. I would still consider applying and just, to kind of give yourself a little bit more flexibility, maybe even think about applying to a future cycle when they open up one of the qualification rounds. Because again, it's a very easy process for the qualification round. It's really just submitting your idea very quickly through their system, and then you get feedback. And it may come with an invite, or they may say, hey, you know, work on these areas and then think about applying. And so I would encourage you to do that, you know, if you think that the idea merits, as I said, and there's a fit somewhere in terms of that product program fit. Okay, any questions about any of this before we move on?
Sorry, quick question, Gloria.
Yeah.
Thanks for your response, but I'm still a little bit confused, which is, and my apologies, I did join in late, so you probably covered it already. But I haven't applied to any of the phases, and I'm not sure how the phases are structured. So can I still apply to this particular cycle, or should I wait for the next one?
Yeah, that's a great question, and happy to clarify. So VentureWell offers, you know, it's an ETeam grant program, and they have applications in, you know, for phase 1 and phase 2. Of course, you have to apply and get acceptance to phase 1 first. And you would need to be a phase 1 awardee in order to apply for phase 2 and get acceptance, if that makes sense. And so if you've never applied, obviously, or gotten an award through any of the phases, then you would start at phase 1. That's a $5,000, you know, award opportunity. And my recommendation, if you're really at the starting, you know, stages, the timeline that is made available through VentureWell is they give you anywhere between 8 and 2 weeks before you apply. But think about, you know, some of the things that you'll have to put together, and I'll share the breakdown of the narrative and some other things, you know, in a moment. But one of the more challenging, you know, areas to complete the full application, if you do it at this point in time, it might not be enough for some of you. It's getting the letter of support. It's also the verification from the university, and I'll talk more about that. That does take time, and sometimes, you know, it's a little bit more than 2 weeks that you'll need to do that. But, you know, there are 3 to 4 open applications each year through VentureWell. So you've got, you know, other ones coming up that you can shoot for. Okay. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Okay.
Definitely. Thank you.
Great. So let's go ahead and move on from here. So the application process, there's a lot for you to think about in terms of the process. And the reason is because the VentureWell grant is granted to the institution, in other words, the university. It goes from the university to the student. And Casey, you know, kind of alluded to this. I work with him as his PI for his project. And so everything goes through the university and then to the team. And so because of that, there is a pretty substantial process involved in getting the applications in. And so that's the reason why I would say, you know, typically it could take longer than 2 weeks. And so even though they give you the time frame, you know, think about applying between 8 and 2 weeks ahead of the deadline, but realistically, you may need more time than that. So the applications do need to go through the university grant office, and for that reason, you do need a PI. And the applications have to be reviewed through the university, and so that's something to be aware of as well. The reason why that's done is because we need to ensure that the grant application you submit is complete, and we also have a grant application system. And because of that, a grant record, of course, would need to be created for your proposal and the submission that you do to VentureWell. So there's, you know, several different steps and folks involved in the process, along with you, of course, putting together the application. And then VentureWell requires that the university verifies and provides that institutional support. And this is done through email verification, all really important things to be aware of. And the other thing to note on the email verification, if the institution does not verify your proposal by email, then you can't move forward in the process. And what happens is you kind of get stuck in the system. It doesn't allow your proposal to continue on. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay, so let's go on from there. So there is a two-step process to be aware of. You do need to notify, obviously the first step in the process was to notify the university, right, that you're planning to apply. And so you'll want to let whoever it is that's going to serve as your PI for the proposal, let them know that you're planning to apply. This will help trigger creation of your grant record for the application. And this is necessary because if you submit and then you get the award, the funding has to go somewhere and then it goes through the university. And the university, of course, doesn't keep any of those funds. They just help administer it. So it goes all back to you, but they act as the administrator to the grant. And then the next step in the process is that you're going to have to submit, obviously, all of your materials to the PI, and then take some time, allow some time for the PI to review completion. In other words, everything is submitted as stated within the guidelines of the open grant opportunity. And so the PI would review all of your materials, ensure it's complete. Then the university, also the grant office, would do the same. And once that's done, the full grant record is created. And so you need to get confirmation that that has happened before you can submit your grant proposal, your application through VentureWell. They do have a portal system to do this. And so what you'll want to do, along with, of course, notifying, and again, remember, this is a two-step process, notifying the university, you also want to ensure that you have created an account for yourself on the VentureWell site. It's easy. I shared the link with you all for the grant section for the ETeam grant. Take a look at the website, but also there is a portal system. You'll want to create your account, and that way you can get your application started. And the other thing to note for institutional support and those email verifications from the university, it does take time, and you need to, account for everyone to check their email and then verify by email. So giving at least 2 to 3 days prior to the deadline is when you should be finalizing your application through VentureWell. Okay, and I'll move on from there. So when I say institutional support, that means, of course, that you have a principal investigator for the project, an administrative contact, and then a department chair. The first step for you, of course, is to check in with your academic program in your department to identify who could serve as your PI, your administrative contact, and your department chair. Of course, you'd have that hopefully already identified. If you have challenges, if none are available through your department, or if you're part of the basement, you are welcome to list me as your PI, and then I've supplied the administrative contact that would be working with me, as well as the department chair, which in this case is our Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Commercialization, Paul Robin.
Can I just say real quickly that I had a chance to listen to Paul Robin speak and had an interaction, and he is quite the character and has quite the knowledge about the basement and a lot of the programs that are associated with it.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned, the basement is part of that area of the campus. So we're part of Research Affairs, and work very closely with Paul. So let's move on, unless there are other questions here. Again, we can share this deck with you all, and so you can have that information available. Okay. And so application components, these are critical to be aware of. Of course, you'll have a title page. It's not an extensive, proposal you put together. It's not a 20-page or 100-page proposal. It's just a 5-page narrative. But it has to be, very compelling and strong in terms of what you put into that. And so we'll talk more about it in a moment. But this is kind of the breakdown of the pieces that you'll have to assemble. There is some areas that we'll focus on momentarily in terms of the narrative components and what those look like, and some tips to think about. You do have to secure a letter of support, a minimum of 1. They'll accept up to 3 of these letters of support. And then, of course, your team has to supply their resumes for the proposal. And then, we'll talk also about page length in a moment, but some of these are really important to be aware of. They're formatting, minor issues, but they do matter. So you'll have to compile your entire application as a single PDF document, and that gets uploaded into our grant system. The VentureWell organization requires a specific naming convention. So, minor details, but be aware of those because they do matter. Okay, and I'll move on from here. So here's what goes into the narrative and some things that are really important to think about. It's nicely broken down for you by page number, so that's helpful. So essentially, you'll have 1 to 2 pages dedicated to describing your technology and the value proposition to the target customer. This is really key, and we'll say more about this hopefully if we have some time to get into this a little bit more deeply. Casey mentioned this as well. It's really important, part of the process in terms of, what you'll encounter if you do get awarded and the training and the learning through VentureWell. But even from the get-go, having a clear understanding of your target market, your customer, that's really significant, and that has to be articulated well in your grant. You have 1 to 2 pages that you'll allocate for describing the market. So this is the size of the market itself, those kinds of details, 1 to 2 pages worth is what you'll put into the narrative, and then a half page on, these aren't the resumes, but a half page on the team itself. And so what are the roles of each of the members that are on the team, and how are they best suited to execute on those specific roles is what you'll want to detail in that section of the grant. And then finally, you have a page that's dedicated to your overall plan. And that's comprised of 10 to 15 highly specific and highly realistic milestones that fit into 2 categories. And those are your venture milestones, your business milestones, and your technical milestones with the project. And so that is really what you'll need in terms of your full narrative. Okay, and I know we're kind of getting close to time, and I wanted to at least give us 5 minutes at the end for any questions. So what I'll do is I think we may even skip over the content piece and instead maybe talk about these helpful tips. I can always go back if we have more time. But just some things to be aware of in terms of the grant itself. And some ways to help you be more successful. And so the starting point is, of course, make sure that you have a innovation that matches the program criteria for the ETeam grant. Making a case for the potential for impact, this is critical. You want to prove it. So this is really important in the narrative. You want to indicate how and also have evidence that demonstrates, in other words, proving the potential for impact with your innovation. You also have to, and this is really, really critical, you have to have a deep understanding of the problem, the customer, and the current market solutions that are available. And so what Casey mentioned in terms of the model, the business model canvas, it could help you in deciphering a lot of this. So think about using that as a tool to develop, sort of the building out your narrative. You also want to have a very clear understanding of the competitive landscape for this innovation. So how are you better? So doing a competitive analysis will help you tremendously. Some of you may already have that. And then indicating how your product or innovation has an advantage over these other competitors. Showing traction through, if you've been part of competitions and won, how many customer interviews you've done. If you've got 100, well, that is, that's a great thing to incorporate into the narrative. It really does show and demonstrate that you understand the lean model, which is something that VentureWell utilizes. As well as understanding the business model canvas. If you filed for a provisional patent, those are all great things. So having an indication of traction in your narrative will be helpful, as well as thinking about explaining the technical aspects of your innovation in non-technical terms. And so think about the lay reader and explain your innovation through that lens versus getting overly technical. And then I won't cover this last one because I think that that's a given, right? We need to do this. And then I'll stop there to see if there are any questions, and I can always go back through some of the other stuff.
Hi, Gloria. I just had a quick question, referring back to like the slide where it talks about non-awardable projects. Something on there that that I guess would qualify as a non-awardable project was how like we'd have a pure research project without defined commercial applications. My group, I'm also a part of Help Store with Quillen and also with Amy. Our commercial application, kind of like how we kind of plan to scale, is through like kind of tiers. I would say like through different tiers, we'd allow our users to access like different metrics since we are helping small businesses and maybe give them further insight. I just wanted to ask kind of like your initial thoughts on that, and if we should be kind of worried about how we're addressing our commercialization.
Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. And I think, for someone like you and what you're working on, of course, you don't have to do this, and this is just my suggestion. You're always free to, to do, otherwise and take a different direction with it. But my suggestion is to think about the next application cycle. Consider applying during the qualification round, and that way, because there are other grants out there, obviously. Not every grant's going to be a fit. You want to seek alignment. That's always important for any, future grant applications for you all with your innovations. Look for alignments, right? Make sure that it's a fit for what you're attempting to do. And so think about maybe applying at the next cycle, and then and that way you can take advantage of the qualification round, get some feedback before you even, kind of go full-blown proposal and submit to phase one.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I was wondering, is it okay to have team members that are not university affiliated?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. So you can have members of the team that are not affiliated with the university. However, what goes into the narrative in terms of the team members that are going to really be executing on the grant, if awarded, should be comprised of your students or current student team members. You can mention in there if you've got, and this could be part of the traction, right? If you've already got advisors, if you've got faculty advisors, if you've got advisors in industry that are also vouching for the innovation, those are great things to include in there. It's fine to note that they're part of the team. That would be okay. However, I would say, for the purposes of the application, making sure that you've got 2 active, currently enrolled students at a minimum that are, making up the kind of the decision, part of the team, and will be executing on the grant stipulations if awarded. That's going to be critical.
Thank you.
I also just had a quick question. Hi, I'm with Esther as well, and since we're part of the Basement Incubator program, I was just wondering if that would make you our PI.
Yes. So automatically, you can list me as your PI. Again, what you want to do is let me know immediately if you have plans, especially if you're planning to apply to the the current cycle, which closes on the first week of February. And so letting me know immediately that that's your plan. And then if you haven't done it already, if you plan to apply in February, please start looking for your letters of support. They'll accept 1 to 3, but you'll need to make sure that that's also done immediately because folks will need some time to produce those letters. And it would be helpful if you're barely going to do that. to also provide, some information and background on the startup, obviously, or the project to whoever will be writing the letter, so that, they have something to work with, because there's not a lot of time.
Do you think there is like enough time now to still apply, or do you think it's cutting it a bit too close?
I think it's a little close. If you haven't, at a minimum, gotten your letter of support, or at least asked, right? Then I would say if you're just starting now, it could be that the time constraints could be a challenge. I think that's what I had mentioned to some of you in the chat. But by no means is it not, possible. It is certainly possible. And if you would like to give it a try, let me know. And as I said, because we'll need to create that grant record for you immediately.
Okay. And then I was just wondering if you would have any recommendations for people we could ask for those letters of support from, like maybe mentors from the basement.
Yeah, that's a great question. So folks that can help vouch for the innovation are going to be the best fit. And so if you are working with anyone in industry that's been kind of helping you along, providing guidance, advice, or even feedback, if it's a prospect customer that you've been talking to, getting their feedback with, iteration 1 of your prototype, those could be great, make for really compelling and strong letters of support. If you're working with faculty that's acting as, an advisor providing expert feedback, that could be another good letter of support to maybe have a faculty member provide.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
Great. Excellent. So, and I know we've got about another minute. I'm gonna, stay here. And so if you have other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I just want to thank you for all the information. This is wonderful. It's opened up a whole new horizon for me.
You're very welcome, Paul. And as I said, what I can do is I can pull all of your emails and then send you the link with the, and actually I might just PDF it to you all with the deck, because there's some things we didn't get to, and feel free, as I said, I'll just put it back up on the screen. Feel free to check in with me. I do have office hours that I host. If you go to the basement website and you check out our team, you'll also see the link to my calendar. It's also on the screen here. So feel free to check in with me if you have questions, either by email or schedule an appointment with me.
Thank you so much, Gloria, for this presentation.
You're welcome. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and have a good rest of your day. And we're going to go ahead and close the session now.
Oh, sorry, just right before you do, I would just like to express our interest in applying for this grant. So I could like email you that if you need, or whatever works.
Yeah, please go ahead and email me, Amy, so we have it on record, and then I can start the process. Do you all have already have the grant started? It is just a 5-page narrative, but it does have to be very strong, as I said, and compelling.
Yeah, we have aspects of that already, but we haven't actually like created it into a narrative yet, but we'll be sure to do that soon, and then get it